Hey, Shalom, Shalom, Shalom. This is Nama from DC Camp. Once again, coming to you with another video. This one about how Puerto Rico, so-called Puerto Ricans who are tribe of Ephraim, they are Israelites, were being sacrificed on the altar of so-called democracy. First and foremost, call Allah Yahweh, Shem Yahweh Shai, Shem Rakash. And of course, double honors go out to the apostles, bishops, and elders of Great Millstone who continue to push out this truth. Salutations to all the fellow Akim out there on the highways and byways pushing this truth and honesty and sincerity across the four corners. Alright, here we go. The Supreme Court rules that cruel laws must still be enforced. The court's decision is a tremendous, if not unexpected, blow to poor Puerto Ricans. So-called. People walk through Old San Juan. Alright, and this is the end cap here. It says the United States versus Valle Madero. I hope I pronounced that right. Alright. It says, which the Supreme Court decided on Thursday is a heartbreaking case. Just yesterday. Alright. It asks whether many of the poorest and most vulnerable Americans can be cut off by their own government simply because they live in the wrong part of the United States. Now, if you've been paying attention to the news lately, over the past month or so, you know, here's this love fest going on with the people of Ukraine. They're not so-called citizens. And yet, here it is, the people fall for this bullshit, not realizing that this was by their own hand. They got caught with their hands in the cookie jar, and this whole thing is covering up or attempting to cover up that fact. And what I mean by hands in the cookie jar, this whole thing with Biden and his son, the president and his son, the so-called lost laptop of his that the FBI conveniently lost, by the way, which highlighted all the bullshit that was going on. The I just have to say it like this, the alleged chemical and biological weapons factories that were found over there, that were of course backed by guess who. But here we have this made up story of Russia just decided to invade because they're the big bully on the block and everybody bought the shit. Hey, the power of propaganda. Wag the dog, whatever you want to call it. And Russia has, hey, every right. This is a case of self-defense when you look at it. When you look at it objectively, that is. But again, here's the propaganda machine. Those big bad Russians. And of course the American idiots have bought it. You got people that are going over there. You know, I'm going to fight for Ukraine. Again, here's something else you probably didn't know. This motherfucking, what's his name? The so-called leader there is related to George Soros, the billionaire that's been backing a lot of this the bullshit that's been going on. Yes, the George Floyd thing, all that. The BLM, so-called Black Lives Matter, he's funding all of this. The fake Jew, the imposter, the pretender. Alright, and this is all aimed at us. And this is our heritage that these people have stolen. This is one big criminal organization that calls themselves the Jews. They hide under the cloak of somebody else's heritage, which they've always done. And people haven't caught on to it. And a lot of it, they throw it in your face like what's going on here. And the BLM, that whole movement, which was really LGBT disguised as such. And here it is, dumb so-called African Americans marching up and down the street, not realizing all the while that what you're really doing using tragedies such as people getting murdered by the police. But what you're really doing is you're speaking up for these deviants, these degenerates. How sad. Anyway, back to this. What happened is this. He's like 67 years old now. He was lived here in the States. Anyway, let's go ahead and read. I don't want to verbatim. I don't want to mess it up. The guy's name is, like I said, Vaello Madero. All right. It says Madero is also a case about democracy and whether democratic governments can enact policies that are needlessly cruel. In an 8-1 decision joined by every justice but Justice Sonia Sotomayor because she is Puerto Rican, the court effectively answered that question in the affirmative. The case involves Jose Luis Vaello Madero, an American citizen who is very poor. After Madero became seriously ill in 2011, I believe he had a stroke, he started receiving benefits under a federal program called Supplemental Security Income, which provides financial assistance to aged, blind, or disabled individuals who lack the means to support themselves. About a year after he started receiving benefits, Vaello Madero moved from New York to Puerto Rico so that he could be closer to his family, and the government continued to deposit his SSI benefits into his bank account for a few years after that. In 2016, however, Madero filed for additional Social Security benefits, and the federal government learned for the first time that he'd relocated to Puerto Rico. So, some of you are going to say, well, oh shit, he did it to himself. No, he had no reason to suspect that he was in the wrong. All right? According to Esau's fucked up laws. This seemingly innocent decision had terrible consequences for Madero because, by law, SSI benefits are only available to residents of the 50 states, the District of Columbia, or the Northern Islands. No, I'm sorry, the Northern Mariana Islands. Puerto Ricans are eligible for a different program known as Aid to the Aged, Blind, and Disabled. But the benefits under AABD are far smaller than the benefits under SSI. As Sotomayor notes in dissent, far fewer people are eligible for AABD benefits than would receive SSI benefits if SSI were available in Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico, residents enrolled in AABD in 2021, get this, received an average of $82 per month, compared to the $574 per month that the average SSI recipient received in fiscal year 2020. Now, anyone know anything about New York knows how expensive it is. So he moved from there back to his home. Let me say that again. Let me read this again, I'm sorry. In Puerto Rico, as compared to the United States and its SSI, if he were to get into this other program, AABD, all right, which is the Aid to the Aged, Blind, and Disabled program in Puerto Rico, he would receive $82 a month. But by comparison with the SSI that he was getting, which is $574 per month. Damn. Worse, the government didn't the government didn't simply cut off Vaello. In 2017, it sued him for $28,000, claiming that he must pay back the SSI benefits he received while living in Puerto Rico. And yet, in Madero, every justice but one joined an opinion by Justice Brett Kavanaugh, that motherfucker. That's the one where they had that meme with Samuel L. Jackson when he was in his nomination. Look at Brett with the big brain. That was funny as shit. Anyway, holding that Congress could discriminate against Puerto Rican residents when assigning who is eligible for federal benefits. And yet they're sending all your tax money over here to this Ukraine shit. When you have people, your own citizens who are in need, letting you know this is a corrupt and wicked ass motherfucking so-called democracy. This is bullshit. This is wicked. But this is what you get for, as the scriptures say, trusting in Egypt. Alright? And the history behind that, yes, our people went to our enemy, and you expect them to do you right. Alright? Damn. Under existing law, Madero was correctly decided. It's rooted in a long-standing legal rule known as the rational basis test, which provides that courts should typically defer to the policy decisions made by elected branches, especially when those decisions involve economic policy. And I say again, I'm sending all this money over here to people that you're bigging up that have been doing wrong, when all the while they got your hands stuck in the cookie jar. So now we got this big ass love fest for these pieces of shit over there. And this is the thing. Here are the people. They keep talking about, they're the Jews. And yes, they're saying this. They're using this fucking tired ass excuse again. And you have these commercials, what is it? The IFCJ, it's the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. I see that commercial. I just want to turn the channel. I can't stand it. Because they're playing you stupid ass people. It's the same shit that comes up. And these are the same people that own all the banks. They make the money. And yet they're still hustling stupid ass people. These Jews are survivors of the Holocaust. Why don't you please support them? It's the same bullshit. And these are the people that hate. I'm talking about our people. They took our identity, you simple bastards. And they keep playing this game, and our people, the majority of which, just can't see it. Damn. Anyway, so they're using the existing law. They're saying, well, yeah, the decision was right by the letter of the law. The law. But this is the wicked's law, so fuck it, you know? It says rational basis briefly explained. It says the rational basis test was a liberal democratic response to the early 20th century Supreme Court decision that sabotaged progressive legislation, often relying on highly dubious legal reasoning to do so. But despite all this legal jargon bullshit, the fact of the matter is all these people, citizens. Alright, and I'm going to skip down all this, blah, blah, blah. You can read that on yourself, on your own time. It says, after the court started striking down New Deal programs, Roosevelt went to war with the court's conservative majority, at one point threatening to add additional seats to the Supreme Court in order to dilute the conservative justices' votes. Eventually, conservative Justice Owen Roberts broke with his foremost right-wing colleagues and started voting with more liberal justices to dismantle the doctrines the court had used to strike down things like child labor laws. And I suspect Unlike what they're trying to do in bigging this guy up, Justice Owen Roberts. I believe that was an act out of self-preservation because if Roosevelt had went through with his plan, you know, in effect to stack the courts against the conservative justices, like I said, I think that was an act of self-preservation. Anyway, the culmination of this turn towards judicial restraint was United States v. Caroline Products, I guess that's how you say it, 1938, which established that with some important exceptions, legislation, and especially economic legislation, is not to be pronounced unconstitutional unless in the light of the facts made known or generally assumed it is of such a character as to preclude the assumption that it rests upon some rational basis within the knowledge and experience of the legislatures. All right. Basically, under this rational basis test, courts will uphold nearly all legislation so long as the government is able to articulate some rational reason why it should exist. In other words, make it look good. Kavanaugh's opinion in Madero holds that Congress's decision not to provide SSI benefits to Puerto Rican residents clears the very low bar set by the rational basis. So in other words, they're going to kick the can down the road. All right, more or less. As Kavanaugh notes, residents of Puerto Rico are typically exempt from most federal income, gift, estate, and excise taxes. So that makes it all right to just fuck them over. But they do pay Social Security, Medicare, and unemployment taxes. Meanwhile, on the benefit side, residents of Puerto Rico are eligible for some federal benefits, including Medicare, Social Security, and unemployment benefits, but not others. Given that residents of Puerto Rico as a whole pay fewer taxes than residents of the mainland, Kavanaugh concludes that it is rational for those same residents to receive fewer benefits. But this guy was living on the mainland. When he took ill, he applied. He didn't know, this doesn't say that he tried to scam the government. He just wanted to move home. I think he had a stroke, if I'm not mistaken. He's 67 years old. And it's like, you know. Anyway, as a policy matter, this argument isn't especially convincing, and Sotomayor writes in dissent, SSI is not a program for the territory of Puerto Rico. It is a program for individual Americans. And because SSI is a program for the poor, SSI recipients pay few, if any, taxes at all, regardless of where they live. If Madero moved back to New York, it is unlikely that he would pay any federal income taxes, but he would nonetheless be eligible for SSI, like I just said. But the rational basis test does not care if a federal policy is actually a good idea. The whole point of this test is to get judges out of the business of second-guessing Congress's policy choices. Exactly. Like I said, kicking the can down the road. And so, if you accept that the New Deal court was correct to stop sabotaging Roosevelt's policies, it's difficult to argue persuasively that the current court may override Congress's approach to Puerto Rico. Wow. Like those scriptures I mentioned earlier, this is what you get for trusting in these devils. All right? It says the Constitution only forbids certain kinds of discrimination. Madero's strongest legal argument is that there are exceptions to the rational basis rule. As the Supreme Court held in the City of Claiborne v. Claiborne Living Center, 1985, one important exception is that the Constitution typically forbids discrimination against groups that have experienced a history of purposeful unequal treatment or been subjected to unique disabilities on the basis of stereotyped characteristics not truly indicative of their abilities. That, hey, they got a good point, good argument. In their brief, Madero's lawyers argue that Puerto Ricans have historically faced such discrimination. Indeed, if Congress had excluded all people of Puerto Rican descent from receiving SSI benefits, that law would be unconstitutional. Discrimination on the basis of race or ethnicity is almost never allowed, but that's not what this law does. As the government argued in its brief, the Constitution's anti-discrimination protections have historically been understood to prevent unequal treatment of classes of persons, not unequal treatment of regions. Federal law excludes all people who live in Puerto Rico, regardless of their race or ethnic background. And if someone from Puerto Rico moves to the mainland, as Madero did when he lived in New York, they are eligible for SSI benefits. That said, there is at least one very high-profile example of the court forbidding unequal treatment of regions, and it occurred in a case that many civil rights advocates view as one of the worst decisions of the modern era. In Shelby County v. Holder, 2013, the court struck down a provision of the Voting Rights Act that requires states with a history of racist election practices to pre-clear any new election rules with officials in D.C. before those new rules could take effect. The court's Republican majority determined in Shelby County that Congress generally cannot treat different states differently. You see? And this is an example of man, in particular, the Edomite, the so-called white man's law, all right, being fallible, not infallible, as is the Most High's. In case y'all don't know what that word means, let's look it up. Fallible. Fallible. Capable of making mistakes or being erroneous. Hence, the so-called white man's laws. That's why they had to keep making amendments. But there are no amendments when it comes to the Most High's law. Malachi 3 and 6. The Most High changes not. Let's get it verbatim. See, once again, this is about a low-level caveman. You know, we're in this era, ERA now, where the scripture is true about Second Thessalonians, 2nd chapter. He's trying to play God. And if you all can't see that by now, I don't know what to tell you. Again, this is Malachi 3. Come on now. And 6. For I am the Most High Yahweh, I change not. Therefore, ye sons of Jacob are not concerned. None of his laws have changed. Yahweh Shai, whom the world calls the J word, JC. The only thing that was changed is the law of sacrifice, because he became the sacrifice for our sins, for Israel's sins and Israel's sins only. That's the only thing that changed. All right. Hence the true meaning of John 3:16. All right. So, again, fallible as opposed to infallible. Capable of making mistakes or being erroneous. And that's his laws. They're always open to vast interpretation. All right. So, let's go back to the article. Let's see. It said, but that restraint, all right, comes at a partisan. Well, I think I skipped. Hold on. Yeah. It says Shelby County is wrong for many reasons, but one of those reasons is that the court seemed to abandon the deferential rational basis test in order to strike down a voting rights law. Okay, if they're so perfect, if they're the Supreme Court, why didn't they catch that? Again, fallible versus infallible. Shelby County, and not Madero, was a departure from the ordinary rule that courts should be reluctant to second-guess Congress's policy decision. Again, the decision in Madero is consistent with decades of Supreme Court decisions calling for judicial restraint. But that restraint becomes a partisan weapon if it is applied selectively. The biggest problem with Maduro isn't its recognition that achieving the broad goal of allowing democratically elected legislatures to govern sometimes means upholding unjust laws. The problem is that if the court was willing to make an exception to its long-standing rules to restrict the right to vote, why wasn't it willing to do so to help impoverished Puerto Ricans? Going back to what I stated at the onset. And yet you have this big love fest with Ukraine. People of Ukraine, are they being so oppressed? And they're over there making chemical and biological weapons against the Russians. And you all believe this shit. Russia just decided all of a sudden just to invade, even though there's been friction over there for a long time. Yes, they hate each other, but that's their problem. That's their business. But you people are so, got your head up, you know, this, hey, this proves also that with that image, that blasphemous image of white Jesus has done. It's Edomite / white supremacy. And you can just see the people that just caught up in it, following along like little puppies. It's sickening, it really is. But hey, so with that, once again, you know, this has been, you know, the Supreme Court made a decision yesterday about this case. You know, it's also been a long-standing thing. There's this friction between Northern Kingdom tribes of Ephraim and Issachar, you know, because of the immigration policies. Been going on for a long time, you know. But you're still Northern Kingdom, you're still hated by the so-called white man. Never forget that. So don't let the petty bullshit keep you divided, you know. Hey, so with that, hey, shalom.